everyone, and welcome to the Next Best Picture podcast, where I am being joined right now by the writer, director, producer, and star. Is there a hat that he did not wear on this project, everyone? For Sacramento, Michael Angarano. Michael, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Hey, Matt.
It's great seeing you, Michael. Thank you.
Hello.
Yes. For those that don't know, Michael and I are re-recording this actually, but thank you, Michael, again for your time here. I really appreciate it, man.
Thank you for having me.
So, in talking about Sacramento, it's a movie that premiered at last year's Tribeca Festival. You've obviously been thinking about it for quite a while, and an independent film like this takes so many resources to put together, and they can take longer than a lot of studio films in some cases because of those limited resources. But I just want to start off before we get into any of those production challenges and opportunities, even. Where did the idea originate from a screenwriting level? What made you want to tell the story, and what made it feel like this is the right time to tell it?
So Chris Smith and I co-wrote this together, and we both were actors, and we did a pilot 10 years ago, and that pilot didn't get picked up. And so we were unemployed, and we were driving around Los Angeles, and we were merging onto the 5 freeway. And I turned to Chris and I said, "Hey, we go to Sacramento?" And he said, "Yeah, let's upend our entire day and go on a long drive, 6-hour drive." And so we were just joking. We were just playing these two parts and going back and forth. And we just went home and wrote that scene. And we basically reverse engineered this entire story around that scene. And that's what we would do for a couple of weeks, couple of days on end. We would get together and we would write. And we kind of retrofitted these scenes or this story around these scene ideas. And sometimes we would write out of order, and sometimes we would just come up with a funny idea for a scene and we would put that down. And so, it took 10 years, but it really hardly took 10 years because we were working, and I would get busy and go off for a couple months. Chris would get busy, go off for a couple months, but it was always something we wanted to make. And it was always something we were open to doing, any iteration of, whether it was both of us acting in it, whether it was, neither of us acting in it, was me directing it, somebody else directing it. We were just open to the idea of making it. We knew it was something we wanted to make. And so by the time, when Michael Cera came on board, and then Maya Erksine came on board, it gave us a really real shot at making it happen. And then, we found money, then we lost the money, and that happened twice. And so many times we were resigned to the idea of maybe it wouldn't happen. And then obviously it did. So, and by the time it did, I feel like it couldn't have been, we couldn't have aligned better with our schedules, with where I am in my life, with where Chris is in his life. It had this weird cosmic energy around it. By the time we made it, it felt like, even though it had taken 10 years and it didn't always, it was just right. It was just right. That is true.
Scripts.
Yep.
So, the question I had to ask was, what made it Sacramento?
Why Sacramento, Matt?
Listen, the floor is yours at this point. You can't plan for this. This is fantastic.
Why Sacramento? Really?
Because game on the play, this whole culture in Sacramento, everybody hates being here, but we are still here. And so
that's
we have
so funny.
This whole there's okay, so everybody wears shit around here that says we hate Sacramento, but you hate Sacramento. And everything, but we love Sacramento. Sacramento loves you more is their newest vibe.
I had never been to Sacramento. There are 1,000 signs in Los Angeles that say 5 North Sacramento.
Everybody makes jokes on Sacramento.
But but the truth is, when we actually made the trek up here, and when we did our little research trip, this is 2017. Chris and I drove to Sacramento.
Thank God.
Pre-pandemic. And we just really, I mean,
There's an untapped culture around here.
among other things, it's also very
So diverse.
beautiful and
Yeah.
it's very familial. It's a neighborhood, but it's also a city. So it really felt like the perfect place for us, and we're very happy we ended up choosing it.
For those that are listening to the audio only version, that was participation from the bartender where Michael is doing this interview from right now. That was amazing. That was a first for me. I've never had that happen
That was
before.
great.
Um, so I talked to you, obviously, the first time that we did this, a lot about how uh, when you were writing the story, the idea of fatherhood, which is so much a part of what this movie is about, wasn't even necessarily like on at like the forefront of your mind, but it just so happened timing wise, given like you said, 10 years. Now you've had two kids at this point. You've have your wife Maya currently a part of this. Kristen, who you had a former relationship with, is also part of it. And so it feels like kind of like this almost gathering of important people in your life and talking about themes that I imagine must resonate with you more strongly than ever.
Absolutely. And also, you're right. When we started writing it, we did not intend to write a story about parenthood.
Hmm.
And that's something that evolved as the stakes raised, as we raised the stakes for these characters. And as we grew as guys, the characters grew also. And so if we had made this 5 or 6 years ago, it would have been an entirely different film without having the insight of what it's actually like to have children and have that experience and go through those stresses and anxieties. I'm sure it would have been a completely different thing. That yes, by the time we made it it we couldn't really tell if it was life imitating art or art imitating life. It was weirdly cosmic and weirdly prophetic that,
Yeah.
I would meet my wife because of this film. And then by the time we actually were able to make this film, we were engaged and had a child. And it was just something that it wasn't only me, though. It was also Michael Cera. He had one of the reasons we had to push initially was because he had a child.
Mm.
And Sam Gray, our producer, Max Goldblatt, our editor. I mean, it happens. Over time, people get married, have kids. That's the natural progression of life, God forbid. But it was one of the things around this film that was so beautiful and cosmic. I always say that, that wasn't our intention, but that's what it turned into.
Yeah. And so the scene where Michael Cera is struggling to put together the baby crib, on a personal level, how much do you relate now to struggles such as that?
I didn't get the last bit of that question, but
How much do you relate to struggles such as that now that you are a father?
yes. Well, the truth is, admittedly, when we started writing this, I on the Ricky Glenn spectrum, I leaned more Ricky, and by the time we made this film, I definitely leaned more Glenn, and stuff and the anxiety that Glenn is experiencing was something that I definitely empathized with and related to because that 0 to 1 jump, the 0 kid to 1 kid jump is a very drastic one.
Yeah. In terms of release schedules, it's so fascinating to me because you have a movie that has a very similar dynamic to this in A Real Pain debut at Sundance. Your film then
Right.
premieres at Tribeca a few months later. A Real Pain comes out officially, and now your film is now releasing officially after it's now had a successful run. And if I tell our listeners that these movies share a lot of similarities between each other, that might be a reason for people to check it out. But I'm curious from your perspective, when you saw this other movie coming out that featured this kind of dynamic between its two lead characters and such, was there a part of you that was like, oh man, oh no, it's Deep Impact and Armageddon all over
Yeah.
again, man?
Um, yes and no, to be honest. Yes, in the sense of I'm I'm big fans of both of those guys. I'm
Yeah.
a big Jesse fan. I'm a really big Kieran fan, and I just want to watch whatever it is that they do. And the fact that they made a movie together, where they go where they're taking a trip, I was like, of course, there's so many similarities to Sacramento, but in the sense that A Real Pain isn't also the first movie to, or Sacramento is not the first movie to take two guys and go on a trip like Sideways,
Right.
Swingers, um, Bottle Rocket. What's that?
Sideways is in Napa.
Sideways is in Napa, but it's still a trip. They still go on the trip.
So don't say sideways. Me.
Right, right. Sideways, Trigger. Right. No, true. Um, I
Got to keep you in check,
in the
Michael.
sense, but in the sense, this is true. When I watched The Real Pain, I texted Jesse and I was like, "Hey man, I loved the movie because I really did. I actually really loved The Real Pain." And he was like, "Thank you. I can't wait to see yours. How similar are they?" And so it's like you can't help but make the comparison. But being in the same conversation is the compliment. That's they're ultimately complementary of one another because they're probably born of the same cloth, but thematically different enough. I feel like there's a moment in Sideways, in not in Sideways, in A Real Pain, where he calls his family, and I'm like, those 10 seconds is probably the most similar 10 seconds to Sacramento because he's calling the
Yeah.
family. Sacramento is thematically all about
And
father
I
and family and
right. And I have to ask you, as a as someone who grew up as a wrestling fan, there's wrestling in your movie. Your film features AJ. Oh my gosh, I can't think of the
Lee.
last name.
Lee.
Lee. Thank you. And I'm just curious, like for you guys, how did that come about? Are you guys like wrestling fans? How did that get incorporated into the story?
Basically, the entire wrestling sequence, the inspiration was born out of our actual research trip that we made to Sacramento in 2017. Chris and I were at a dive bar, and we were talking with the locals and drinking, and somebody pointed to the owner of the bar, and he said he's a former fighter. He actually fought both of the Diaz brothers, and so that entire idea that those women, Ariel and Jess, those characters in the script would be former fighters, came from our trip here because apparently there's a very large fighting community here in Sacramento, and AJ's tape that she made, I wasn't. I was aware of her as a fighter, as a wrestler, but I wasn't that aware. I wasn't that familiar with her. But her tape was genuinely funny,
Yeah.
and she just brought something to the part that that was instantly relatable and different. And I think also she's going through that career transition in her own life where she's going from being a wrestler to now she's a writer and an actor. So just something about it holistically really worked.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely, for sure. As we get to the end here, I'm curious to know this is your second directorial feature after Avenues. I'm curious to know what major lesson did you take working on Avenues and bring it over into working on Sacramento?
Probably communication.
Hmm.
That was a real learning curve for me on avenues where just going from acting to directing, it there are things that you take for granted, and and I just feel like as a human, that was the biggest step that I needed to take, even in being confident in my own voice, being confident in my own ability to communicate. It wasn't just about, you know, talking about shots or frames or, anything like that. It was really about stepping into that space as a person. And I think that was something that I brought into Sacramento. Just just the people look to you to make decisions, and they also look to you to dictate the tone on set. And that was something I really learned on Avenues. that's something that I probably took for granted going into avenues. I probably thought, oh, I know what directing is because I've seen it. But there's things that you need to do that are, that you can't just observe, you have to experience.
Your television resume is very extensive. You've been on a number of hit shows. I'm curious, do you have any intention to want to direct for television, or do you want to keep it strictly for film?
No, I'm definitely open. I don't know if I would want to direct a show that's already running. I feel like I would be more interested in making a pilot.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like that is a really hard job.
Mhm.
Stepping into that role when on a pre-existing show that's already running. I think that's a really tough job.
Yeah.
And so I feel like for me, I would be most interested in, if it was a pilot, if it was something I was establishing, if I was establishing the look, the tone, stuff like that. I
Totally.
think I have the ability at this point in my directing range to step in and like take on a style that's not my own.
Yeah. Well, is there something that, in terms of directing style, like, is there something like a new challenge that you want to tackle with whatever the next project is, a certain genre
Yeah,
or anything like that?
well, for sure, and for Sacramento, I don't think it's Sacramento that is also totally indicative of my style, so to speak.
Okay.
It kind of called for its own style. It called, whatever a project really calls for. It called for, I would love to shoot in as least amount of coverage as possible and shoot things in oneers and do fun things with the camera. But Sacramento felt like such um uh the amount of times I watched it in my head, it felt like it just called for something specific.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. If anything, we are always, as creatives, in service to the story and the characters.
Exactly.
So
You
that
said
makes,
it best. Whatever serves it. Whatever
yeah,
serves.
that makes perfect sense. Well, Michael, thank you for doing this again. I really, really
Yes.
appreciate it. And I hope everything goes well, obviously, with the rollout. And I hope people really check this one out because, not only does it have obviously recognizable names attached to it that might draw them in, but as I was saying earlier, the story itself of these two guys, the trip that they go on, the deep human emotions that they experience, the bond that they share with one another, how that also grows, breaks apart, grows back again. I mean, I just think it's life, encompassed in a film, which is something
Thanks,
that I think
man.
a lot of people can relate to. So,
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I really appreciate it. I'm very excited that people can actually see it now.
yeah. Well, thank you once again, and best of luck to you, man.
All right, Matt. Thanks, dude. We did it. We
We
did it.
did it.
Did it. Thanks. See
Take
you
care.
later.